It's time to spruce up this rough-turned bowl. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to take this once-turned bowl and we're going to turn it, yes, a second time. This is poplar and it's a relatively soft wood, easy to cut and easy to carve. So we're going to spruce this up in its second turning and we're going to come up with a final bowl shape. Now remember, when we do a twice-turned bowl, the bowl is going to be round forever. It's not going to distort or warp. Now I've got a lot more about that on my Tree to Bowl Understanding Green Wood course. You're going to want to check that out if you haven't already. There's lots of ways to process wood and this is just one of them. Now, this has been drying for many years. I've had it actually sitting on the counter behind me. You've probably seen it in many of my other videos, but it's been sitting for several years. It's good and dried. It hasn't really distorted too much, which is fantastic, but today we're going to do its final turning, or the twice turning. I'm gonna get this mounted to the lathe and we're gonna get started. Okay, I'm using a faceplate or a jam chuck that has a faceplate on it, and this is a large disc jam chuck. Now I got the idea for this design from Glenn Lucas. The idea of that hollow area inside, which is basically just made up with 2 layers of plywood and a void in the middle, and then I've got some old rubber matting, like floor matting, that I've glued to those. The idea is that most of the time when you dry a twice-turned bowl, it is going to, you want to make sure you keep your tailstock tight here, by the way. And I'm going to trim up this tenon so it fits properly. So what happens is when you have a twice-turned bowl, usually the pith area or the center area of the tree will expand or appear as if it's expanded as the bowl dries. Now this bowl didn't distort very much, which is actually really nice. But what happens is that pith area will stick out, and it can be a problem to mount to a flat disc like this. So that void in the center of this disc allows that pith area to kind of rest in there and be well supported. Okay, so I've trimmed up the tenon and I've got it sized for the chuck. And what I'm doing now is I'm doing a pole cut. The surface, again, this did not distort a lot. Now I don't do a lot of work with poplar, and it's a very simple soft wood. It's used a lot in woodworking, and it's typically painted. But I'll tell you what, I knew somebody that had a poplar tree that needed to be taken down, and of course, I'm not going to let that go to waste. And this wood is absolutely beautiful. Now, I'm doing a pole cut here, and what I'm doing is I'm actually rubbing the bevel against the bowl first, and then engaging the cutting edge, just like I would do a push cut, except backwards. And you can see what I'm doing is I'm cutting down the high areas here. I still have some rough areas up next to the shoulder, and we'll address those in a moment. But what I'm doing is, again, I'm rubbing the bevel and then just gently turning the cutting edge into the bowl. Here you can see rubbing and now cutting. This is not a scraping cut, this is a cut. This is a pole cut. And what it's doing is it's leveling out the high spots on this bowl. Now, a lot of times when you do a twice-turned bowl, there can be some dramatic movement in the wood where there's really high, big spots and low spots. So you're basically knocking down those high spots and evening out the surface. Now I'm going to turn around and I'm going to make a push cut around the exterior. It's a little tricky making the cut up against the shoulder and the tenon with a push cut because it's hard to get the tool in there, and that's where the pole cut's really nice. But once you have access, I really like using the push cut. So I'm going to do a push cut around the exterior here. And what I'm doing is just taking down high spots and smoothing out and defining and creating the outer shape or the exterior shape of this bowl. So you want to take your time and make sure you're making nice slicing cuts. And I'm going to stop before I get to that mat. I don't want to be cutting into the mat. Now, here's a great opportunity to use your light. See, I'm moving the light around. If you move the light down the side of the surface of the bowl, you're going to see your rough spots. You're going to see your tool marks. You're going to know exactly where you need to do a little bit more work. Now I'm doing a shear scrape. If you notice, I have the flute closed up against the surface of the bowl, and I'm engaging only the lower wing, and I have the handle tilted down. This is basically like a shaving cut.
And this will help smooth out any tool marks or any rough spots. This is a great finishing technique, and I've got a video all about the shear scrape. Go to my channel on YouTube and search shear scrape, and you'll see that video. It's a technique, if you're not using the shear scrape yet, you're going to love it. Here I'm using the shear scrape now to define the outside of this curve. You can see the tool marks there, and you can see they're just basically being erased. I like to think of this as like the magic eraser technique. The great thing about this, it doesn't remove a lot of material. So you don't make that mistake where you're removing too much material, then you've got to go reshape the bowl. It's just shaving. Okay, so now I've got the exterior pretty much shaped. I don't have the rim established yet. I'm going to take this chuck off, and I'm going to put my jam chuck, or I'm sorry, my four jaw chuck in, and I'm going to mount this to the chuck. Now, this wood is relatively dry and it can be kind of brittle. That is a recipe for having the tenon snap off. The way to prevent that is I'm not over tightening this tenon, and I'm going to be very delicate with my cuts. I'm not going to get aggressive. I'm going to make light cuts. I could bring the tailstock up into the center of this. I would need to put some type of support in there so the tailstock's not leaving a mark in the bottom of the bowl. But for now, I'm just going to turn this with just the four jaw chuck. You can see I'm making light cuts here. I'm going to remove that material at the tip. Now this has a closed rim, meaning the rim is narrower than the widest part of the bowl. So I'm doing a supported cut here up to the apex or the widest turn of that bowl. And again, I'm going to use the shear scrape to clean this area up. Now, if the outside of your bowl is really wobbly when you mount it to the chuck, there could be a variety of different reasons. You might want to try to loosen the chuck a little bit and just rotate the mount a little bit and see if it turns a little more true. You got to remember, we're working with a plant. So this isn't super precise. The idea that you can turn the exterior and then flip it around and put it in the four jaw chuck and have it turn perfectly is pretty rare. Now I've got that top rim is a little bit wobbly, or appears to be wobbly, and I want to just chew that up a bit so that I can see the side and make sure the side's smooth. It's kind of like, have you ever seen a car going down the road and the hubcap isn't mounted right and it looks like the tire's all wobbly, like it's going to fall off? That's what happens when your rim hasn't been trued up. Okay, so I'm going to put some decorative beads on the exterior of this bowl. I don't want them to be perfectly even. I want them to kind of gradually go away from each other. So instead of measuring this out, I'm kind of eyeballing it. As they go down the side of the bowl, I want them to be a little bit wider or farther apart, and I want them to kind of fade out. So the bottom bead that I'm going to turn is going to be relatively shallow, but the top one is going to be the deepest. So I'm just going to take my time and kind of eyeball these and mark them. It's also a good reason why I cleaned up that surface so that I can turn these beads nice and even without there being high and low spots. All right, I'm just going to eyeball this last one. I'm going to just be a little bit farther away from the other ones. The camera angle there makes it look like they're all together, but they're a little spread apart. All right, I'm going to be using my spindle detail gouge. Now, this is a little different than if you're using a traditional spindle gouge. I have a more of an exaggerated angle on this, and I really couldn't tell you what the angle is right offhand because I freehand this. You can see what I'm doing is basically creating a letter U to go down the sides and the nose of that bowl gouge. And this is very similar to the way we use the spindle gouge. I said this is very similar to how we use the bowl gouge, where I'm going to rub the bevel first, and then I'm going to roll the cutting tip into that cut. This is like beading, basically. You're doing scroll beading work, exactly the same. You're just rolling the tool around into that crevice. Now you might be saying, wait a minute, I remember there was a video back there you told us never to use the spindle gouge on a side-mounted bowl. And that is absolutely correct. You do not want to do that for removing material or roughing or doing anything aggressive. You can do it for decorative work, and this is decorative work. As you can see, I'm making very light cuts. I'm just rolling. Got a little kickback there. You want to start at about a 90-degree angle. Engage that tip and just roll it around into that crevice. And then you can come back and take your time and clean up those curves. But this is just a decorative cut. I'm not doing anything aggressive. I'm not trying to remove a lot of material. The reason we don't use a spindle detail gouge or a spindle gouge when we're turning a bowl is the tool is really not designed to handle the force that the end grain will create when it comes around and impacts the tool. We have the bowl gouges. They're much more durable, and that's the tool you want to be using. Okay, so I'm going to come back around here, and I apologize, the camera wasn't focused perfectly here. I'm going to remove some of this material inside and start establishing this inside wall. So you want to take your time. I wanted to make more aggressive cuts here, but I can feel that the tool was slowing down a bit. So instead of making big, deep cuts and potentially getting a catch, remember, if I get a catch here, that's going to put a lot of stress on that tenon. That tenon for this size bowl probably is a little too small. I should have gone to the next size up, which is about 4.5 inches. Instead, I've got to be really cautious here. Actually, my next size up is about 5 inches. I've got to be really cautious I don't get too aggressive. So I'm just nibbling off small layers at a time. You can tell when everything's okay because you're getting a nice clean cut. You should be feeling little resistance from the tool. It should be slicing and just simply moving through the material. If you feel like you have to push hard, or if you're hearing any kind of chatter or getting any kind of resistance from the tool, you're probably making your cut too deep. So back out, make your cut a little more shallow, let your tool do the work without forcing it, and you'll have a nice light cut. This also gives me an opportunity to flip the tool around and do a scraping cut to create the curve for the top rim of this bowl. I want this to be curved to match the beads on the exterior. I'm going to do some of the curved portion here with the bowl gouge by scraping like you're seeing from the outside and the inside. But I'm also going to be able to sand this and make it nice and curved when we get it completed and we're ready for sanding. Okay, so I'm going to work down the side of the bowl. I'm establishing my wall thickness, and then I'm going to maintain that wall thickness from the rim all the way to the bottom. This is a really good example of why the rim to the bottom of the interior of the bowl is a great technique to use, because with a twice-turn bowl, if I were to be turning the base of this and carving it out and then working up until I just kept making thin layers, one layer at a time till I'm down to the wall thickness, it's going to be potentially a little tricky to get this stable. So, and especially a bowl this size. What's nice about working from the rim down is I can establish that thickness. Now, I'm not going to make these walls super thin. These walls are at least 1/4 inch thick, about 5-6 millimeters thick. And that's because this is a softer wood. When the finished bowl is complete, I don't want these to have really thin walls, because if it were to drop or fall and I made the walls really thin, there's a good chance this will crack and break. So instead, I just want to make it a little more durable. Plus, this is in scale wise, this is a very large bowl. Now I've cleared away the material for most of that area you're seeing for the first couple inches going down the rim. So now I'm going to make a nice continuous smooth light cut to smooth that out and create that top rim area. It's a good idea to stop frequently and check that wall thickness and make sure you've got what you're looking for. I also need to remember those beads are on the outside there too. If I make it too thin, I'm going to be making some hoops, and I don't want that, obviously. So I'm just going to keep working down through the interior, removing the next section. I've got that top section created, and I have the thickness where I want it. And I'll just move down and do the next section. It's really that simple. And the nice thing about doing this is there's no guesswork. You're not coming back to an area later and going, whoa, this got really thin, or this is still too thick. You know that you have the wall thickness where it is when you work down like this. So now it's still a little thick there, which is fine. You want to keep working down each area down to the proper thickness, or the ideal thickness that you're desired here. And just keep removing that material until you're down to the wall thickness. It's feeling pretty good there. So I'm going to keep moving through. Going to merge these areas. You can see how light this cut is. I have the flute relatively open, meaning pointing upward. You want to be careful not to make aggressive cuts with the flute open like that. It's a good way to get a catch, but because it's such a light cut, and I'm basically just shaving away the top surface area and smoothing that cut off, it's not too bad. It's not likely to get a really bad catch there. If you're getting catches and you're having issues with the bowl gouge, keep in mind it's going to take some practice to get used to the feel of it. But what's going to be even more important is you get used to the feel of how aggressive you can be. You need to listen to the tool and understand when it's kind of complaining. If you're feeling like you've got to push the tool into the wood to cut, you may be cutting too deep. You may not have the bowl gouge position properly. It's practice and timing. Now I'm going to use my calipers here. I had a video not that long ago where I didn't use my calipers and it came back to bite me. But what I'm using the calipers here is to make sure that I'm maintaining that wall thickness all the way throughout. With a larger bowl like this, it's hard to get your hand all the way around there and feel with your fingertips where the thickness is. So it's a great idea to use calipers. Now I have a link to those calipers in the description below this video, as well as all the tools that I use in this video. So you might want to check that out. And if you want to go directly to my website and look at my recommended equipment guide, you can do that as well. It's over at turnawoodbowl.com. Up at the top, it'll say recommended equipment. Okay, so I've switched over to my longer tool rest here so that I can reach down into the bowl a little bit better. And I'm using my larger bowl gouge. I was getting a little chatter, a little bit of noise with my smaller 1/2 inch bowl gouge. This is my 5/8 inch bowl gouge. So what happened is there's vibration that's being created from the tool extending over that tool rest. And if you can hear chatter or if you feel vibration in the tool, you most likely are not going to cut a smooth surface. So stepping up to a slightly larger bowl gouge, usually the shank on the bowl gouge will have an ability to absorb that vibration. If not, you may have to switch over to a micro bevel, and that's a whole other topic, but I'm not going to use a micro bevel here because I can reach in here with my 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. That's a nice thing about the 55-degree bevel on the nose of this tool is it allows you to put the tool down into this. Here you can see I'm not touching the rim of this bowl. If I were using a 40 or 45-degree bevel, I would be at a much sharper angle and I would have the tool itself would be rubbing the rim of the bowl. So I would have to switch tools. That's what I love about the 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge is it's very versatile. It's able to get down deep into these bowls without any issue. Now you could use a micro bevel here, but because this bowl is so wide, the 55-degree reaches down in there just fine. And if you're curious about what the micro bevel is, I've got a video all about that as well. So go to my channel and go up into the search bar and search micro bevel bowl gouge, and you'll see the video that I have on that. And it explains it. Now that's a great tool if you're making narrower bowls or deep bowls and it's tricky to get down into the bottom, or if you're using a 40-40 grind or a 45-degree bevel. Now remember, I highly recommend use the bevel that you prefer. Use what works best for you. You don't have to use exactly what I'm using. But if you are using a 40 or 45-degree bevel bowl gouge, you're probably going to also need a micro bevel bowl gouge. So check out that video. Now what I'm doing here is I'm trying to cut up on that edge. You can see it's grabbing that side there and it's getting a little grabby. I just want to go slow here. I'm just making really light cuts. Now at the moment this pass is convex. Rarely or never would I want the bottom of the bowl to be convex or the curves coming out towards you. I would not want that. I want that curve and that flow of the bowl to flow down the sides and right through the bottom. So typically, or pretty much always, the bottom of the bowl is slightly concave at least. Now you can see that it's coming out towards us a little bit, and I also made a rushed cut there, which made that swirl mark, and I was rubbing the bevel. So when you're pushing the gouge into a cut, you'll make those little swirl marks. So I'm making very light passes here, and I'm just going to take this down. I was using the calipers and check the wall thickness to make sure I'm not going through this bottom. I want to make sure there's plenty of material there. And I'm going to remove more material here in the center. So I'm going to go past the flat point where the bottom, inside of the bottom now is pretty much flat. Again, we're going to check it and feel that. It's kind of flat. Now I need to make it just barely concave. Because it's such a wide bowl, the bottom of this is not super deep. I'm going to go back to my smaller bowl gouge and make a nice finishing cut here. This is my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. It's going to make a nice light pass, just a light cutting pass. And remember, don't push through that center. You want to let the tool do the cutting. And I'm going to make this slightly concave so that it's got the continuous curve of the bowl going right through the sides. All right, nice. Now I'm going to go through the grits and I'm going to sand this. If you notice, with the lathe running, I'm never going to the center bottom of this bowl. Why would I not do that? Well, if I go across that center, I'm actually going to cut two sides. Now here I'm also going to work on the curve of that rim. You can see how I'm just rolling the sander around that curve to get a nice bead. If I went through the center right here with the lathe running, I'm going to make two passes, one right before the center and one on the other, and I will make a divot in there, and I do not want that. So you want to take your time and sand the center area by hand like you saw me do. And I sanded through all the grits. I went from 120 to 180 to 240 to 320. Now I'm reverse mounting this again, and that's why you really want to have that tool stock mark that you see right there, because it makes it so easy to line the piece back up again when you go to mount this. If you're turning your initial bowls with the bowl mounted to a faceplate, that's fine. Take a moment right before you turn the bowl around and put it in the chuck to bring the tailstock up, if you're not already using it, and make a mark there so that you have the center bottom of the bowl marked. It makes it so much easier when you go to remove the tenon and the shoulder. Now, this is going to be a calabash bowl. What's a calabash bowl, you might ask? Well, I've got a video on that too. If you go to my site and search calabash, you'll find it. What I'm doing here is I'm basically removing all of the shoulder and all of the tenon, so this bowl won't have a traditional foot. Instead, it's going to have a convex outer curve that follows the curve of the walls and the outside of the bowl. So it's one fluid curve. Now, the traditional calabash bowls were actually made from squashes and gourds. So if you imagine a great big squash or a gourd, how it's going to have this nice flowing curve, that's what we're emulating when we make a calabash bowl. So I'm doing push cuts into the headstock, which is a great stable way of making cuts. And then I'm going to do a shear scrape here to smooth out these areas. Switch tools here. I was getting a little vibration with the lighter 1/2 inch bowl gouge. This is my 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. I'm doing this shear scrape with to smooth out that bottom. And I'm going to come back in with the 1/2 inch bowl gouge and do these push cuts to further reduce the size of this nub. Just want to take your time, make really light passes here. I'm going to smooth out the surface right below here. The more that you can remove here, the better and smoother it's going to be, and the less sanding you need to do. If you're not comfortable doing this, it's fine. You can stop at this point and just cut that nub off with a handsaw, small little pull saw. I'm using my spindle detail gouge here to reduce the size of the nub. Remember, we've got a big mass of a bowl here. I don't want to get too small with this. And I don't, especially at this point with the bowl being almost finished, I don't want to be throwing this off the lathe. So I'm going to apply forward pressure and turn the lathe off here in just a second, and that's going to cut through there. Instead, for right now, I'm going to take the bowl gouge again is smooth up this surface. I was feeling a little bit of rough spot there. I'm going to smooth this out. Now I'm going to come back with the spindle detail gouge, and we're going to take this nub off. I'm going to apply forward pressure and turn the lathe off, and it's going to cut that nub right off the surface. Now all that's left is to sand that area. I'm going to sand back and forth, and then I'm going to flip this over because I don't want to be sanding on one side only and create a low spot, but I need to remove all those marks. So I'm going to continuously flip it back and forth so it turns out nice and smooth, and I'm going to go through all those grits again, and it's time to sign the bowl. Now you want to be careful, especially softer woods. Start with a low temperature if you're using a wood burning tool like I am, because if you have it up really high initially, you're going to get really bad scorch marks. It's not horrible. You just remember, if you do get the scorch marks, you can sand that back a bit as well. I like signing with a chisel tip, and I have a very linear signature I like to do, so that's the chisel tip works for me. There's other tips you can use to sign with. Okay, I'm going to be using Tried and True's Danish oil. Now, Danish oil is a generic name. It's almost like salsa is a name for sauce, or curry is a name for a sauce as well. And if you know salsas or curries, you know there's pretty much an infinite amount of them. Well, Danish oil in woodworking is the same way. Danish oil can be a variety of different things. Look at that spalting, by the way. Wow. Tried and True uses pure linseed oil, pure boiled linseed oil. And it's not like anything else you can get in any stores. They do small batches, and they're actually boiling it, and they're using traditional processes without adding chemicals or metals. I am not paid by Tried and True. This is just a wonderful product, and I highly recommend it. It's food safe. It is just linseed oil. It is technically edible. I don't want to eat it or drink any of this, but it's a very pure product. Doesn't have anything added to it, and it's a fantastic product. I highly recommend it. Again, I've got a description to this and everything I use in this video in the description below this video. You might want to check that out. I'm just applying a thin coat, and then in 10 minutes time I will wipe it again with a clean rag and take any high spots out. You do not want to leave this on thick or have any high spots, because you'll get a gummy, sticky surface. You do not want this. You're going to go on thin coats slowly, and you can apply multiple coats of the Danish oil. So I'm going to make sure everything gets covered, and I'm going to wipe it down thoroughly. And again, it only sits for 10 minutes, and I'll come back with a clean cloth and wipe it again. But look at this bowl. This is poplar. This is kind of a throwaway wood in most woodworking worlds. But look at that heartwood and the spalt. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm thrilled with this. It's amazing from what it was initially to what it is now. It's just a fabulous, beautiful piece of wood.
Well, from a pretty clunky looking once-turned bowl to this, you got to say that's quite an improvement. I am really happy with this piece. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, this is a piece of tulip poplar, which is a pretty generic wood for woodworking. It's relatively soft, typically gets painted. You wouldn't think there's this much going on inside here, but look at that beautiful heartwood, and there's spalting in there too. You gotta love when you find spalting. I think this turned out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with the beading on the side of it. I like how the graduated transition blends into the bottom, so it doesn't feel like big heavy beads all the way down. I'm pretty content with that. All in all, I think this is a really nice bowl, and it's a calabash. There's no foot on this bowl. This can sit flat on a table, and it has a relatively flat bottom. It does have a convex curve. We never really want to make it completely flat or concave. That's just not the way to do a calabash bowl. Instead, we want it to have that nice curve that emulates a gourd or a squash, because that's what a true calabash bowl is. I have another video all about turning a calabash bowl. You might want to check that out. The cool thing about this is that it just has a really nice organic feel to it and look, especially with the spalt in there, and I'm just really happy with this. Now I'm going to add a couple more coats of the Danish oil to this over time. This will most likely absorb this first coat and it'll look somewhat dry. That will raise some of the grain, so I will sand this by hand and then I will apply another coat of this oil, and I'll keep applying it till it has a similar look to what you see right now, because it's still a little bit wet with this oil. It'll take about 72 hours for this to really soak in, and it'll take a little bit longer for it to cure. So I'm just going to give it some time and I'll work on multiple coats with this. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you're going to do a twice-turned turning. Let me know if you're going to do some decorative beads on a bowl, or let me know if you plan on trying to make a calabash bowl. Super fun and a super cool, very nice looking bowl when you're done. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do me a favor and click that like button. Also, be sure to subscribe if you're not subscribing. And if you haven't already, go over to my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything you need to know about turning wood bowls, including online courses that can help you get started right now. So go check it out, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time, happy turning.